BNC, 100% black and brown host around the clock. Finally, news that speaks to us.
These days, it often feels like the country's social fabric is fraying. Homicides were up in major cities in 2021. A wave of smash and grab robberies hit retail stores across the country during the holiday season. Pedestrian deaths spiked over the past 2 years because of an increase in reckless driving, with police in several states attributing it to a rise in anxiety, pandemic-level drinking, and a deterioration of social norms. No one in America has gone untouched by the trauma and exhaustion of the pandemic, but those on the lower end of the income spectrum were dealt the worst hand. If you don't have a vacation home to run off to, you're stuck in the city. If you need to socially distance, you're stuck in your home. If you rent and it is increasing and the eviction moratorium has ended, home itself can be a shaky concept. It's all within this context that another tragedy continued to unfold in New York last week. Police confirmed today that a man was charged with attempted murder for a brutal hate crime against a 67-year-old Asian woman entering her apartment on Friday. The attacker reportedly followed her to her door and called her racial slurs. Security camera footage showed him striking her 125 times in the lobby. Police say the woman is currently recovering in the hospital. The attacker appears to be a black man, and at least 2 of the 4 recent hate crimes committed against Asian New Yorkers appear to involve black perpetrators. Anti-Asian hate crimes spiked last year, and of course, the idea of black-Asian conflict has been part of the discussion. But does that conflict truly exist? And if it does it exist in the way and to the extent that some suggest? It's a narrative, and one we should address as the trauma of the pandemic continues to unfold. Joining me now to discuss, Jumaane Williams, public advocate for New York City and candidate for governor of New York. Jumaane, thank you for being here. This is happening in New York. You're public advocate for the city. You're running to be the governor of the state. What do you think is happening here? And do you believe that this is a manifestation of some sort of black-Asian conflict or animosity?
You know, I believe, the context that you were setting is the right one. I think as a nation, maybe even globally, we've been saying for a long time, even as we were coming into this pandemic and starting to come out, that our mental health is being traumatized collectively. And so there are those who have mental illnesses that haven't been dealt with for a very long time. And then there are the rest of us that may not even have acute mental illness, but are dealing with mental health traumas. We have people on planes who are disrupting their planes. You have people who are committing suicide at higher rates. So we're seeing all these things manifested in different ways, but there is no way around it. One of the things that have increased are anti-Asian hate crimes, and we have to call it out. And unfortunately, we've seen too many of them perpetrators be black. But I am proud in our city and our state. So far, there's been a resistance of making that split communities apart. And indeed, what we have to do is bring both of those communities together. I'm proud of the leaders in the Asian community that was saying Black Lives Matter just a few years ago. And I'm proud of the leaders, the black leaders, who are making sure that we're speaking out as loud as we can on the anti-Asian hate.
How does this get addressed, though? I mean, it's one thing during Black Lives Matter because the people who people were protesting against were part of a system. They were part of an architecture, an organization, which was police law enforcement. They had rules. They were hired and fired. They, had a place out of which they worked. They had, rules by which they conducted themselves. These are individual people conducting these crimes. How does one confront that? If this is because we have a handful of these crimes that have been the most high profile. There have been much more of these crimes that are not as high profile, but there's a handful that have been high profile. So that means that vast majorities of these black people are not participating in this. Vast majorities are not kind of should be targeted in this way, even for correction. How do you get at this if they're individuals doing it?
Well, what was strange is that a lot of this funding that deals with hate crime prevention, that deals with upstander training that people have been doing for many years and been trying to do, was cut. Right, it was cut a few years ago. We're just now starting to see some of this funding come back to groups who are dealing with hate crimes, groups who are dealing with these communities culturally responsibly ways. And so we do know that our law enforcement partners have a role to play. We also know when we rely solely on our law enforcement partners, these things don't get addressed. And so we do know that co-creating this type of public safety means getting funds to community groups who work in these communities, getting funds to community groups that do upstander training, making sure we are addressing mental health, making sure that that the people who have acute mental illness have a continuum of care, which they simply don't do. They simply don't have. One of the reasons that I'm running for governor is because we've been putting out reports in the position that I have now. We've been putting out ways that we can address these. And too often they're going on deaf ears. And so we're running for a position that can help us get the money where it needs to go, build out the structures that need to be built out.
Jumaane, to what degree do you think that these may be just copycat killings? The one thing that has been, that happens with things like this is they get a lot of attention. And for most decent people, that attention says, oh my God, this is horrible, we should do something about it. But there is a tiny fraction of people who see all that attention and say, I want to participate in the attention.
What we've seen hate crimes, whether it's Jews, whether it's LGBT, whether it is Asian, whether it is Islamophobia, we saw homeless people shot and killed just recently. So we've seen these hate crimes going up, unfortunately. Some of them may be copycats, but there is an issue that we have to deal with. And the victim of the copycat, unfortunately, is going to feel the same impact, and the community is going to feel impact. And so, yes, I think some of it might be copycats. It might trigger other people who may be mentally unstable to begin with, or may have some hate toward these communities, or both. But I think the prescription of how to deal with it is going to be very similar. But
Jumaane
just
Williams,
to add,
thank you as always. Yes, go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, I also want to make sure that the media takes more care and responsibility while we're talking about these, to do it in a more responsible way that helps address the problem without feeding some of the fears that I see. But that's another conversation for another time.
Right. But it's a great point. Thank you for ending on that. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.